Survival is not just about staying alive. It's about finding hope, healing, and strength. This is The Survivor's Voice. I'm your host, Angie Sedore. Before we begin, this episode may contain discussions of trauma, abuse, or other sensitive topics. Listener discretion is advised. We don't recommend listening to this show with young children present, and we encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Today on The Survivor's Voice,
I'm pretty young and naive and met a man that I fell in love with instantly. And it starts out really happy and fun, and then things unfortunately took a turn for the worst. I either owed it to him, myself, or to God to stay with him because I knew what I got myself into from the beginning.
Have you forgiven yourself? We're here with Anna today on The Survivor's Voice, and Anna has graciously allowed us to talk to her about her story. So Anna, tell me what your story is.
My story starts back when I was 18 years old, actually. It's pretty much fresh out of high school, pretty young and naive, and met a man that I fell in love with instantly. I was still just a teenager myself at that time. He was 24, and we were enjoying life as a young couple. We really were. My story starts to go into...
Were you still in high school?
I was not still in high school. I was graduated and out of high school at that point. And it starts out really happy and fun, and then things unfortunately took a turn for the worst.
How long were they happy and fun for?
I'd say at least 3-4 years. The beginning was a lot of fun. We didn't have any issues. We got along great. And one thing that a lot of people actually complimented us on was the fact that we never argued. We honestly didn't have our first argument until I was 7 months pregnant.
Were you guys living together?
We were. Yeah, I moved in with him a little too quick for a lot of people. I met him, and within 3 weeks I was actually living with him. So, hindsight's 20/20.
How did your parents feel about that?
They were not happy. They definitely were not happy. I was 18 at the time, so there was nothing they could do, unfortunately. But they were not pleased until they met him. They did like him instantly off the bat, though.
So what was his personality like? Like, what drew you to him?
His personality was a lot like mine. Very outgoing, happy, very talkative. He could talk to anybody. He was a very smooth talker.
Charming.
Very charming, yes. He really impressed everybody with anything that he said, whether it would be his life adventures or what he did for his work or anything in between. He really did have a way to captivate his audience.
So you got pregnant?
Not actually right away. We got married, and then almost 2 years later is when we had our son.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
That was a struggle.
Was that the 4-year period then?
So we got married 2.5 years after we met. Roughly 2.5 years after we met, and then another 2 years later we had my son. So about 4 years.
Okay. And you feel like something shifted?
Something definitely shifted, and honestly I think it was my pregnancy and me realizing that we're about to bring a child into this world.
Yeah, that's heavy. So what changed? I
think the fact that I was 7 months pregnant and he was just drinking every single night, and there really was no end in sight for me. It was just a constant nightly battle. And it wasn't even nightly, like some people would assume, 9, 10 o'clock at night. We're talking 5 o'clock right after he gets off of work. So really, afternoon, early evening type of deal.
Yeah. Was he already drinking when you met him, or do you feel like it increased?
He was, and that's honestly part of why I stayed so long. When I met him, I was a young teenager. I was 18 at the time, so I was drinking and partying, so I didn't see anything wrong with it.
Sure.
But he had told me at that point that he did have a drinking problem, but I never really took it too seriously.
You were so young and impressionable.
Yes.
And I'm sure you didn't have anything to really measure it against.
Exactly. I had no other life experiences to measure it against. I was, pretty much fresh out of high school.
Yeah. Did his personality change when he drank?
It did towards me. So it didn't towards a lot of people until his later years in life. His personality towards me was always different. He would always get more volatile with me, and he would always get more, or lack of better words, more controlling with me. I wasn't allowed to see certain people anymore. I wasn't allowed to talk to certain people. So I didn't really feel like I had much help or anything there. So I kind of stayed, and like I said, when I met him, I knew he was an alcoholic, or I knew he had a drinking problem, or at least at the fact that he liked to have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So when I married him, I stuck it out with him knowing that he was an alcoholic. And so I kind of felt like I either owed it to him, myself, or to God to stay with him because I knew what I got myself into from the beginning. But in the same sense, I didn't know what I got myself into.
Sure. So when you say he was more volatile, what do you mean by that?
At first, it just started out with like throwing random things around the house. If he was angry, it was never really throwing things at me. It was just taking his anger out around me. He would raise his voice and he would raise his fist to me, but he would never hit me. When he was drunk around other people, though, they never saw that side of him. He was always happy. He was always outgoing. He was funnier than all get out. Honestly, he had the greatest personality around everybody else.
Did you ever go to these people and were you not believed because they never saw it?
Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, on several occasions, I had gone to his mother one time when our son was just over a year old, and she knew that he had a problem because it runs in the family. And, I'm not holding any like responsibility towards her or anything because, you can't control genes.
Right.
But I had talked to her about it in the past, but was roughly a year old. I went to her when she was visiting. She lived in Montana. So she came over and she was visiting one time, and I was telling her the night prior how bad it was getting between Brett and I and with the alcohol. And she in turn took him to Costco the next day and came home with 2 cases of beer.
Wow.
Yeah, so to say that I wasn't believed is definitely an understatement.
Wow.
Yeah. The first time I ever tried to leave him, I believe was around 4 or 5 years old. And I went out to my friend Christina's house in Kellogg, and I got a call from my mother, and I'm pretty sure she remembers this because the phone was on speakerphone, but my mom straight up told me that I was the one destroying my family by leaving the situation that I was in. And that hurt.
Yeah.
That hurt so deeply.
Absolutely.
To know that like not even my own mother
supported me.
Yeah.
I'm sure you felt hopeless.
Yeah, I really did. Thank God I had my friend because it was a hard time.
Yeah.
It was really hard. And, ultimately I ended up going back home because I guess the guilt and the shame that I felt for leaving, because like I said, I married him knowing he was an alcoholic. I kind of felt like
it was your fault.
Yeah, like it was my fault. Like I had to stick it out and see it through. And I come from the type of family that works through their problems through thick and thin. The first divorce in my family didn't happen until it was my older brother. I mean, for generations before, aunts, uncles, grandparents, second cousins, nobody got divorced. It was not something that happened in our family.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it was a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
It really was.
So how many times did you go back and forth? Did you leave? And
oh gosh, I couldn't even give you an actual amount, but I know it was at least 7, 8 times before we separated for the first time. But even then, I still let him come back.
Was there something that he did that was like your breaking point?
I had just given him chance after chance after chance, and I had gone back so many times. We had been separated, so we moved out of one of our houses and into a new one. And at that point, the camel's back was starting to break because I single-handedly, for the most part, moved us out of that house because he would go to work and then he would say he's off work, but he wouldn't come home for a long time. And I would end up finding like bottles of vodka in the garage, things like that, just hidden in random boxes, hidden in backpacks, things like that. So when it came time to move, I had to unfortunately move everything, which, was at that point 10.5 years worth of our life with our child as well. So it's a whole house full of things.
That's a lot.
We got over to the new house and He unpacked one box and then he quickly like packed it back up. And I asked him what was in that box, and it turned into a little bit of a fight, and I ended up looking inside the box, and there was a bottle of vodka there. And at the time, we were moving into a new house and everything, so I kind of wanted a fresh start. So at the time, that one kind of set me off, and that's when at that point...
Did he promise you that it would be a fresh start?
Oh, yeah. Dozens of times before we moved into that house. Yeah, that this was going to be a change.
Yeah. Had he ever been to rehab or anything like that?
He went to an AA meeting one time, and he ran into somebody that he knew from high school and unfortunately never wanted to go back. Yeah, pride got the best of him, sure. Unfortunately.
Yeah. So how bad did it get?
It got to the point where, I mean, obviously there was a ton of screaming. It did get physical. And I'm not going to say I'm, the most angelic person. I definitely did start some of the fights when he was drinking because I was at that point where I just couldn't take anymore. It's really hard to raise a child being married, but also being a single mother, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I was literally doing everything. He was taking out payday loans against, behind my back that I didn't know about. Every single week he was taking out money. And so every time he would get his paycheck, it would be $1,000 less than it should have been, $1,200 less than it should have been, $800 less than it should have been. I had to start making up for everything around the house, whether it be, bills, picking up, yard work, anything that needed to be done.
It's almost like it would have been better had you just been a single mother.
Almost, yeah.
Because the weight of that and then having to deal with everything else, I just can't even imagine. So tell me about when you finally got the courage to leave. What did that look like?
So that was a really hard decision I had to make. At that point, it was affecting not only myself emotionally and physically and mentally, it was affecting our child. Our child at that point had just turned 8 years old, and he would, once he saw that Dad had been drinking or once he even smelled the alcohol, he would either go hide up in his room or go across the street to where my parents were living across the street. He would go over to their house because of the fights that unfortunately would ensue afterwards.
Yeah.
So I came home. I had a bingo night at the casino with one of my girlfriends, and we came back home, and she was, staying with us at the time. And we came back home, and there was a cup of like green liquid just out of the corner of my eye hidden underneath the table kind of behind the couch, and it was super odd. So I just went and smelled it, and when I smelled it, it smelled heavily of alcohol. I don't know what it was, if it was vodka or what. I could smell the alcohol. And at that point, I just decided that was it. Because before we had left, we had a huge conversation about how I felt so uneasy about leaving because I didn't want him drinking around anymore. And he had promised me over and over that he was going to be fine. And so he literally broke that promise that same day. So when the next morning came, because, you can't do anything that night because they're too drunk. It's pointless to try to get anywhere. Agreed. So the next morning came and I sat him down, and you could tell he was ashamed. He knew. That's one of the hardest parts for me, is he knew he couldn't control it. So we had the discussion or argument that he had to leave because I couldn't take our son out of the house and try to uproot his life on top of it. So he ended up going and staying with his dad. And in the 6 months that he was staying with his dad, unfortunately, he had gotten into an accident in Spokane while he was drinking and crashed into a power pole.
Oh my gosh.
And then he was forced to go to, it was kind of like an AA therapist.
Okay.
Per se, yeah. I wouldn't call it treatment, but it was some sort of therapy with a counselor.
Gotcha. Was that like court ordered?
It was court ordered. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, he needed it.
Yeah.
He really needed it, but unfortunately it didn't help.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the story doesn't stop there. After that, my heart was breaking for him because he really was the man that I loved. I don't marry to get divorced. I don't, marriage to me really is for life.
Yeah.
And so it hurt me so bad to see where he was in life. And so he came back home. That stint of him being home only lasted 3 months before we inevitably had to separate again. And at that second separation is when I finally had the courage to actually do things on my own. And I don't know if it was a combination of my friends pushing me and cheering me on despite not having my parents' support, and the fact that we had separated prior, so I knew I could live on my own.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a huge realization for me, that I could do it on my own. Because when I met him, I left my parents' house and moved straight in with him.
Yeah, it's like
I've never known life on my own.
Yeah.
Yep, I've never known life on my own. And so that was a huge thing for me, a huge step in the right direction.
I'm trying to think, because I mean, your mom and your parents lived across the street the whole time?
Well, for at least the last 4 years
Oh my gosh.
of it, yes.
And did they ever witness anything?
They witnessed it on several occasions before I realized my mom was not going to be supportive, and neither was my dad. You know, I had called them. I had called my mom one night when Brett and I had got into it. He was drinking, and he got really mad at me for saying something. I couldn't even remember what I said. And maybe I deserved for him to be mad. I don't know, because like I said, I don't remember what I said. It could have been something kind of like poking the bear a little bit. But he threw a hat at me. And after he threw his hat at me, I picked it up and I threw it back at him. And he came up at me. I stood in the doorway and he was shoving the door on my body over and over and over. And so I pushed him away. One thing led to another. Cops ended up coming. I called my mom. My mom literally looked at me and said that I probably started all of it.
It's hard because it's in us to run to our moms to find security and just that comfort. And so I can't even imagine.
It was really, really hard. Really, really hard. Once we moved into the house across the street from my parents, nothing helped. Nothing changed.
Was that intentional?
It wasn't
Okay.
necessarily intentional.
More coincidence?
Yeah, the man that owned the house across the street, I grew up with him. He was like an uncle to me because,
Okay.
you know, we grew up all right there. And at that time, the house that I was in was selling, and he was about to move out and rent out his place. So I think God kind of had my back right there, because after the second separation and after Brett's health started declining so much, my parents did start to step up a little bit. At least they stepped up with my son.
Oh, good.
Yes. I think God put me there for a reason. You know, it may not have been the support that I wanted, but it was the support I think that I was going to need.
How old is your son now?
He's 12 now.
Okay. Where's
Yeah.
Brett now?
Brett is no longer with us, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, so then we need to back up. So
Yes. There's some parts that we haven't got to yet.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. After the second separation, he kept telling me that he was sober, but I kept having a gut feeling that he was not. We were married for 10 and a half years at that point. We were together for like 13 years. So I really did know him quite well, and I knew he wasn't sober. A little bit of more time goes by, and, you know, he would come over and pick up, or I would take him over to his house for a little bit or whatever, and I'm starting to notice changes in Brett's body.
Mm-hmm.
He's starting to gain a lot of weight in his face. He's starting to gain a lot of weight in his stomach, and he's starting to gain a lot of weight in his legs. But from my experience with my grandmother, who died from liver failure, the weight in his legs was very, very concerning to me.
Wow.
Because you don't just gain weight in your calves and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I knew it had to be some sort of bloating issue. What it was at that point, I did not know. I asked him dozens of times and pleaded with him dozens of times to just go see a doctor, figure out what's going on. He never wanted to, and I don't know if it's because he was scared or if he subconsciously kind of knew what was happening. This is like 3 months later. Brett is so swollen to the point where he's almost unrecognizable.
Oh my gosh.
My mom had seen him for the first time in a while, and she even pulled him aside and said, "Oh my God, Brett, like, what is going on? Something is happening." And Brett just kept claiming that it was from his job at the time, that he was just sitting so much and just not being as active.
Jeez.
Brett and I took our son to summer camp in July of 2021. It was a 5-day camp. And we said, our goodbyes to our son and everything, and wished him well and hoped he had a great week. And after that, that was the last time that I ever saw his dad. From that moment on, Brett went on a bender that I wasn't able to get a hold of him at or anything like that. The Friday that I went and picked up from camp, I called Brett just to see how he had been doing, see if he wanted to come say hi to him or if he wanted me to bring out to him.
Yeah.
And the man I reached on the other end of the line was not my husband. It was Brett, but it was not at the same point. He was saying some really, really confusing things, but not like he was drunk, not confused, like drunk. So he would be saying things like, and I were just playing hide and go seek, and Ezra was here earlier this morning. Ezra is his best friend who lives in the Bahamas.
Wow.
And was standing right next to me, and an hour prior to that I was just picking him up from summer camp. So
yeah, it's like a delusional.
It was like a delusional, but there was no slurring, nothing like that. So I asked him if I could FaceTime him, and he goes, "Yeah, of course, baby." And so I FaceTimed him, and as soon as I looked in his eyes, my heart just sank. His eyes were as yellow as a sunflower. Oh my gosh. And I'm really not even exaggerating that. I have a hard time looking at that color now because of what I see.
Yeah.
So he was super delusional and not understanding, and I didn't want to freak him out. So I said, "Oh, hold on, honey. Let me call you right back." And he goes, "Oh, okay." And I get off the phone with him, and I called 911, and I sent the paramedics to his location, and they got there within 3 or 4 minutes of me calling them, thank God. But when they got there, he had no idea who they were. He didn't even understand they were paramedics. The paramedics and sent them, and then I called him right back, and I said, "Hey, honey, I've got some people coming to come check on you, let them in when they get there." And when they got there and he was talking to me, he goes, "Why are there people in uniforms here?" And I don't know what kind of uniform he was thinking, but he clearly did not understand it was a paramedic. They got him into the ambulance and rushed him down to KMC immediately because of how bad the jaundice was. I met him there at the hospital as they were literally wheeling him into the ER. I mean, I sat there and I waited for the ambulance to get there. And we walked in and we go into his room, and the smell, the ammonia smell that was coming off him was unlike anything I had ever smelled before. The color of his skin, the color of his eyes, his nails, everything. It was horrendous. It really was. I called his mom in Montana and let her know what was going on. And I called his biological dad and his stepdad, or I guess ex-stepdad. He's still in his life, or was still in his life for his entire life. He really raised that man. And I called everybody and I let everybody know what was going on. And that unfortunately didn't stop the hard times.
So how long was he at the hospital?
He was at the hospital for, I believe, 13 days.
Okay.
I believe it was 13 days total before he took his last breath and passed away.
Did he pass away at the hospital?
At the hospital. He never came back out after that day.
What did the doctors tell you?
The doctors had told me that his liver was in stage 4 liver failure. Gosh. And they told me it was liver cirrhosis, or cirrhosis of the liver, which was caused obviously by his alcoholism. You can have cirrhosis of the liver caused by, things like fatty liver disease. However, his was unfortunately not caused by that. It was directly tied to his drinking.
How old was he?
He was 38.
Oh my gosh.
He was 38.
Way too young.
Way too young. He had a 9-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And his whole life ahead of him.
Yeah. How did your son handle that?
He's getting better now. He's definitely getting better now. It was very, very hard at first. Understandably, he is an only child. And I mean, that's his dad. Yeah. Every boy needs his dad, and every boy looks up to his dad and loves him tremendously. And so it was incredibly hard to navigate those waters.
I still have my father, so I don't know personally what it's like to lose my father, let alone at such a young age.
Yeah. Were you the one that had to give him the news?
Yeah, I was. I took him to the hospital the morning that unfortunately I had to turn off the machines. Was actually able to walk in. However, he saw him from a bit of a distance and saw his dad with all the tubes hooked up to him, all the wires, the machines, and it terrified him. And he turned around at that moment and said, "Mommy, I can't do this. Mommy, I can't." That is something that has affected my son too to this day, the fact that he couldn't say goodbye. He tried to, but he couldn't. So there's a lot of different things that are hard to deal with when your child loses their parent.
Well, you have to be strong for them.
Yeah, and that's a whole other battle.
Oh my gosh.
Whole other battle that so many people don't even understand. Like you have to be strong for your children, but in the same sense, there is that fine line where you do have to break down as well and let your children know that it's okay, that life happens and you have to feel your feelings in order to get through it.
So this has been 3 years ago?
3 years.
That's
as
fresh.
of July 28th.
Wow.
Yeah, super fresh.
Yeah. So you're still going through the grieving
I
process.
am. Yeah, July is a hard month for me every year because it's the month that him and I got married, and it's the month that I lost him.
Oh wow.
Yeah, July's a hard month.
I bet it is.
But we navigate it, we get through it.
Yeah. Where are you guys at now?
We're in a much better place, honestly. I met a man that understands his past and is very, very patient and very kind about it. And he loves I deeply. And I truly do thank God for him, because without him, I don't know where I'd be right now.
How long ago did you meet him?
I met him just about 3 years ago as well. I really do feel
Kind
that
of rescued you.
yeah, that God put him in my life for a reason. I actually met him prior to Brett's passing. I feel like God put him in my life for a reason, because I was going to need his understanding and his companionship and his love.
Did you get any support after Brett passed from your parents?
I mean, I would get like some support, but I think a lot of people unfortunately blamed, or not necessarily blamed me for his passing, but thought that some of my actions caused it.
Wow.
Yeah, because his father was in the hospital when Brett told me that he started drinking heavily again when I told him I was going to file for divorce. And so they took that as, you did this.
Wow.
That one was a hard one to come to terms with. Brett's own mother didn't even talk to me almost the entire time that Brett was in the hospital, until the day prior to me having to turn off the machines.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was really hard. It was
Do you
really
have siblings?
hard. I have 2 siblings. Yeah, I
Okay.
have 2 brothers.
Where were they at in all of this?
They were here. They were around. I don't think they knew what to do or what they could do, but those 2 have always been supportive of me. Hands
Awesome.
down, they've
Good.
always been supportive of me. I love those 2 dearly.
Thank God. Are you the oldest?
I'm a middle child.
Okay.
Yep, I'm stuck in between 2 brothers. They love me.
I love that. So what's next in your life?
Hopefully, a lot of adventure and happiness, a lot of moving forward, and a lot of healing.
Have you forgiven yourself?
To an extent, yeah. It is still hard to come to terms with some things that I have either said in the past. Like one of the fights that I really remember, back when, our son was probably 2 at this time, but one of the fights I really, really remember was looking at him and saying, if you don't get a handle on this now, you're going to die before you're 40.
Oh my gosh.
And the fact that he passed away at 38 is something really hard for me to come to terms with.
What do you think, if you look now looking back, what kind of support, if you could tell somebody else that is going through what you're going through right now, or what you went through, if there was any sort of support that could have really helped you and your son, or even helped Brett, what would that have looked like? What could you tell yourself?
Honestly, I would tell myself that you really can do it. You really can get out. If your spouse or your loved one is truly not willing to save themselves, you can't lose yourself trying to save them, and that you can do it on your own. It's gonna be hard, and there's gonna be a lot of speed bumps in your way, and there's going to be a lot of roadblocks and probably straight up walls. But it is something that can and needs to be done.
Yeah.
Not only for your sanity, but for your family's sanity and for your own peace of mind too.
Yeah. Do you feel stronger?
I do now. There are times where I don't. That's for sure. There are times where I feel like the whole experience broke me down and that I lost a part of myself, but I'm slowly getting that back. Yeah, with the help of support from friends, with the help of some family members, with books that I have read, some self-help books. There's some self-help podcasts out there, websites that you can get into. Even if your spouse themselves is not an alcoholic, I know AA does provide support for people who need that extra help, that are struggling with somebody that has that addiction or has an addiction to something else. So there are a ton of resources out there. You actually have to take them.
Yeah. Agreed. I think some of us understand this, but not everybody understands how powerful we are as human beings.
Something I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Until much later in my life. I was 29, turning 30, when I finally felt like I had the power to do something about it.
Yeah. Well, I am so grateful that you were vulnerable with us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah. And I really hope that anybody that's listening that's either stuck in this right now or has been through it, but maybe hasn't gotten to the place that they want to be yet, that they've gained strength from your story.
I hope it helps even just one person to know that you're not alone. You're really not. This is such, unfortunately, a common thing. And especially in my situation with the alcohol, because alcohol is so widely accepted. It is the drug of choice for the majority.
It's actually interesting when somebody says, I don't drink, the immediate response is, well, what's wrong?
Yep.
Or did something happen?
It's always a what's wrong with you if you don't drink.
Exactly. But somebody could say, well, I don't drink water. Oh, that's cool.
Right? Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Next week on The Survivor's Voice,
he put a knife up to my neck and threatened to kill me, and then said that just to tell him what was going on. She was like falling over on the ground and just like couldn't even pick herself up, and she was like, what are you guys doing? Like, what are you guys doing with my kids? But they would never be where they were at today if it wasn't for that, and I wouldn't be either.
thank you for joining us on The Survivor's Voice. I'm Angie Sedore, reminding you that every survivor's story matters, including yours. If you or someone you know has a story to share, you can contact us at booking@thesurvivorsvoice.net. Your voice deserves to be heard. If you enjoy the survival stories we share, we would love it if you gave this channel a follow and a 5-star rating. No matter how dark the journey, the light of resilience shines brighter. Thank you for listening. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing this story of survival, please share this powerful testimony with them. A heartfelt thank you to our incredible listeners for your unwavering support, and to the survivor community for your courage and resilience. You are the heart of this podcast.